August 18th, 1590, an English ship drops anchor off Roanoke Island on the coast of what is now North Carolina. Governor John White comes ashore for the first time in 3 years. He calls out. No answer. He searches the settlement. The buildings are empty. The possessions are gone. The 115 men, women and children he left here have vanished. There are no bodies. There are no signs of violence. There is only one word. Roanoke was England's first serious attempt to establish a permanent colony in the New World. Sir Walter Raleigh had received a royal charter from Queen Elizabeth to claim land in America. An earlier expedition in 1585 had established a small military outpost on the island, but the men abandoned it within a year, returning to England with Francis Drake. By 1587, Raleigh tried again. This time he sent families. In July 1587, 115 colonists arrived on Roanoke Island. Men, women, children, families intending to build permanent lives. John White, an artist and naturalist who had been on the earlier expedition, was appointed their governor. He knew the land. He knew the local indigenous peoples. He was, by every measure, the right man for the job. What he could not have known was that he would spend the next 3 years unable to return. On August 18th, 1587, exactly 3 years before White would return to find the colony gone, a child was born on Roanoke Island. Her name was Virginia Dare. She was the first English child born in the Americas. Her mother was Ananias Dare's wife, Eleanor, John White's own daughter. The governor held his granddaughter. 9 days later, he sailed back to England for supplies, intending to return within months. White reached England in late 1587 and immediately began organising a relief expedition. But England was at war. The Spanish Armada was preparing to invade. Queen Elizabeth ordered all available ships to remain in port. Every supply attempt White made was blocked, commandeered or turned back. By the time he finally secured passage back to Roanoke, 3 years had passed. He had left his daughter, his granddaughter, and 112 others on an island with no word of when help was coming. When White finally came ashore on August 18th, 1590, the settlement was abandoned. The buildings were still standing, some belongings remained, though many items had been moved or buried. There were no signs of attack, no blood, no graves, no indication of violence of any kind. The colonists had not been massacred. They had left, deliberately it seemed, and not in obvious panic, but they had left no explanation. White found the first clue on a tree at the edge of the settlement. The letters CRO carved into the bark. 3 letters, nothing more. No context, no date, no explanation. He recognized the carving style. Deliberate, careful. Someone had taken the time to do this properly. He continued searching. At the main post of the fort entrance, he found the rest of the message. On the main post of the fort entrance, one word had been carved in capital letters, Croatoan. Before White had left in 1587, the colonists and their governor had agreed on a signal. If they needed to move, they would carve their destination. If they were in distress, they would add a cross above it. There was no cross. White believed immediately. They had gone to Croatoan Island, 50 miles south, where the friendly Croatoan people lived. White immediately ordered the ships to sail for Croatoan Island. They set off. A storm blew up. The anchors dragged. The ships were pushed off course and badly damaged. The captain refused to attempt the passage again that season. They turned back toward England. John White never returned to America. He never found out what happened to his daughter, his granddaughter, or any of the 113 other people he had left behind. In 1998, archaeologists studying tree ring data from ancient Virginia cypress trees made a significant discovery. Between 1587 and 1589, precisely the years the colonists were alone on the island, the region experienced the worst drought in 800 years. The crops would have failed. Fresh water would have been scarce. Whatever the colonists decided to do, they decided it under conditions of extreme environmental pressure. They could not have stayed where they were. The theory with the most supporting evidence is that the colonists integrated with local indigenous communities, primarily the Croatoan people on what is now Hatteras Island. In 1701, explorer John Lawson visited Hatteras Island and found the Hatteras people reported that several of their ancestors had been white. Some had grey eyes. English cultural practices appeared embedded in the community. English ironworking artefacts, hammer scale from blacksmithing, were later found buried beneath historical refuse on the island. But not everyone went to Croatoan Island. A second line of evidence points inland. At a site near the Albemarle Sound, roughly 50 miles from Roanoke, archaeologists discovered fragments of 16th century English pottery, borderware, baluster jars, gun flintlock pieces, and an aglet, all consistent with the 1587 colony. This location, known as Site X, suggests that the colonists split. Some went south to Croatoan, others went inland. They did not all go to the same place. In 2012, researchers using X-ray spectroscopy examined a map drawn by John White himself, the most detailed map of the Virginia coast from the 1580s. Under a small paper patch White had used to make a correction, they found something hidden. A 4-pointed star marked in red and blue, indicating a location 50 miles inland along the Albemarle Sound. The same area as Site X. White had marked the inland location on his own map, and then covered it over. Nobody knows why. The hidden marking raises a troubling question. John White knew where the inland site was. He had marked it on his map before he left in 1587, which means the inland location may have been the plan all along. A backup settlement discussed before his departure, and then he covered it. Some historians believe he covered it to protect the colonists' location from Spanish intelligence. Others believe the answer is simpler. He never expected anyone else to need to use the map to find them. A darker theory has also been proposed. Spain had intelligence on the Roanoke colony. Spanish documents show they knew its location and discussed eliminating it as a threat to their interests. Some historians argue that political forces in England, linked to Sir Francis Walsingham's intelligence network, deliberately delayed White's return to undermine Walter Raleigh. Whether by Spanish action or English political betrayal, the colonists may have been abandoned as a calculated move, but no direct evidence of either has been found. The picture that emerges from all the evidence together is this. Facing an extreme drought and the certainty that White was not coming back anytime soon, the colonists made a rational decision to leave. They split into at least two groups. Some went south to Croatoan Island, where they had allies and knew the land. Others went inland to a pre-arranged secondary location. They were not massacred. They were not abducted. They survived by becoming part of the world that was already there. If the assimilation theory is correct, and most archaeologists now consider it the most plausible explanation, then the mystery is not where they went. The mystery is that we cannot prove it. No burial site has been confirmed. No definitive DNA match has been made between colonial-era remains and known descendants. The artefacts are consistent with the 1587 colonists, but not exclusive to them. The evidence points in a direction without delivering a destination. Virginia Dare, the first English child born in America, was 3 years old when the colony disappeared. If the assimilation theory is correct, she grew up among the Croatoan people. She would have learned their language, their customs, their ways of living. She would have been by any reasonable measure more indigenous than English within a few years. Her grandfather went to his grave not knowing what became of her. She has become one of the most enduring mysteries within the mystery. Roanoke Island is a tourist destination now. The Fort Raleigh National Historic Site marks the area of the 1587 settlement, a reconstructed earthwork fort, a visitor centre. In summer, an outdoor theatre production called The Lost Colony has been running on the island since 1937, one of the longest-running outdoor dramas in the United States. The mystery has been performed for almost 90 years, and it still has no ending written in. Here is what the evidence taken together most strongly suggests. The colonists did not die at Roanoke. They left in an organised manner in at least two groups, guided by indigenous allies who had reason to help them. The drought forced the decision. Croatoan told White where to look. The hidden map marking told him, if he had reached Croatoan, where the others had gone. He never got there, and so the thread was cut and was never picked up again. Archaeology at Site X and on Hatteras Island continues. New tools, ground-penetrating radar, isotope analysis, DNA sequencing are being applied to materials that earlier investigators could only examine with their eyes. Each season turns up new fragments. The picture gets slightly sharper. But the definitive evidence, a burial site, a document, a DNA match that closes the case beyond doubt, has not yet emerged. Researchers expect it will. Eventually. A wooden post. One carved word. A governor who spent 3 years trying to get back and never made it. A storm that turned a ship around 50 miles from an answer. 115 people who vanished so completely that 4 centuries of archaeology have not yet produced a definitive account of where they went. Croatoan is the most famous single word in American colonial history. It is also still an incomplete sentence. The rest of it is out there somewhere, in the soil, in the DNA, in a language that stopped being spoken before anyone thought to write it down.